All right, well, hello there again. If you listened to the previous message and you're choosing to listen to this one, it's because you said, I'd really like to learn more about the association's evaluations process. I won't profess to answer every question through this quick video, but by all means, my goal is to give you a bit of a window in. I find sometimes awareness can lead to a bit more comfort with the process. And more importantly, just if you have some further questions or if you have some specific feedback, our evaluations handbook is kind of locked down and ready to go for this year, but certainly we are able to make some minor adjustments or any adjustments we want heading into next season, and sometimes your feedback's what helps. So I guess I'll start with a bit of an agenda. So our objectives, which we kind of talked about in the previous call, I'll quickly run through on the off chance somebody's watching this exclusively. I'd like to just validate a bit about who's who when it comes to the evaluations process at each A level. A little bit about UAAs, especially for those of you if it's your first year or you haven't experienced that before, a little bit about that coming into this weekend if you're listening to this before the weekend that we're running them. UAAs are applicable up to U14. Talk a little bit about what do things look like at U16 and U19. What about goalies? A little bit about our evaluators and also our coaches, and then just kind of cap off with some of the realities of the process as we see them. So starting with our objectives, and a bit of a recap if you already listened to the previous call, but if you didn't, it's just consistent, fair, and accurate. We do a lot of double checking as volunteers through this process to make sure everything's as accurate as we possibly can have it. Our goal is impartial assessment. You will never see an evaluator who has an athlete at that age level. We ensure there's always impartiality to those involved in the process. I'd say as simple as possible. We are a rotating board, and as a result, you need something that as people come and people go over the course of volunteerism, they're able to pick up this process and execute it to the best of their abilities. Flexible and adaptable. We've got brand new players, maybe just starting out their U10 journey, all the way up to athletes at the U19 level. And then again, and a goal of this video is we're here to be as transparent as possible. While we don't go broadcasting scores widely, we want to be as transparent as we can on just the process in which we take. So who's who? At each of the age levels outside of active start, where everyone participates at the same level, we have what we know as a division director. They are your point of contact. They will be the one issuing information. They're the one you need to pay attention to. They'll be the one that's telling you sometimes the day before what time you skate the next day, and we'll talk a bit about that later. A meeting was held just yesterday, facilitated by Aaron Lawson, our evaluations director. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Travis Drew, who does a ton of work behind the scenes with a lot of data to support Aaron and the rest of the team in this process. And then something called an oversight committee, which is a group of 4 individuals, oftentimes board members, that are there if ever there's a tougher decision that needs to be made. Are we going to form 3 larger teams, or are we going to form 3 smaller teams, et cetera, et cetera. So each age level has something called an oversight committee, and their goal is to both oversee and be available if a decision needs to get made for the division directors to be able to ultimately form these teams and hand over all these teams to their great coaches and managers to get the season underway. So that's a bit of who's who and how the process works from a people standpoint. What are UAAs? I won't play this video, but if you wish, there's YouTube demonstration of exactly what are the universal athlete assessments. And much like I'll say about a lot of processes, is it perfect? No. Is it the best we've got? Absolutely. I've spoken to parents that have much older athletes that were here before UAAs existed, and they were quick to say UAAs solved a lot of the challenges for us. It's a consistent assessment. Yes, it just looks at skating. It can't contemplate things like shooting and passing because it's hard to have a consistent process across the province that does. It helps us form teams, and we won't get into the scoring, but what happens is our UAAs are completed. They're essentially a timed set of skating drills. Ringette Alberta comes to us as an association. This is an example of the table last year from U12, and says, okay, if you're going to form an A team, try to ensure it has a UAA score in this range, and there's kind of a target team score. and then ditto for B teams, ditto for C teams. So when we get all these UAA scores, we'll look at what we have, whether it's at U12, U14, U10, and just see like, okay, at U12, if we're going to have 5 teams, if we form 1 A team, 2 B teams, and 2 C teams, the UAA scores of those collection of athletes fits nicely into this target range, which gives us all as much confidence as possible that when we show up at tournaments and it's a B team against another B team, all things being equal, hopefully it's a competitive game, which is what we all want when we enter a season. So that's a little bit about UAAs. And then that's why you'll notice when you look at our evaluations handbook, we lean on them heavily at the U10 level. They're basically our primary measurement at the very youngest of ages. And then you'll notice we do have some scrimmages just to watch for gameplay skill sets, especially if we maybe got a couple of players that are kind of on the line between maybe step 1 and step 2. Just we use those scrimmages to help us figure out where will that athlete get the best chance to develop properly. And then you'll notice as you get to U12 and U14, we start to still acknowledge UAAs because, again, they form how Ringette Alberta governs our team formation, but we start to dial down the percentage on UAAs and dial up the percentage of scoring based on our evaluators, which we'll talk about momentarily. And then at U16, U19, UAAs do not happen any longer. It's 100% based on our scrimmages. And then when it comes to team formation, Ringette Alberta actually passed a new policy this year, and you'll notice they've just acknowledged that historical data. They've done a wonderful job. Our own Katie Vegan now sits on the tiering committee for Ringette Alberta, and they've got some great statistical minds who are looking at the historical competitiveness of the athletes that form an association, and then they're going to use that to inform us. Okay, Edmonton, at U16, and you're forming 3 teams, we recommend 1A, 1B, and 1C team. And at U19, if you have 2 teams, we recommend 1A and 2B teams. So just they are going to come to us in the very near future with some tables. They're basing it on their statistical models. They used it for the first time last year, and the challenge last year was we didn't have provincial game sheets digitally. The previous season, last year, whether it was tournament data, league play, etc., everything was going into that RAMP game system, and those brilliant statistical minds can use that to help figure out what team formations will give us the best mix of competitive play. So we'll see what kind of letters come out of that. My ask of all of you is focus less on whatever letter is behind a name, focus more on, are we having exciting 6-4 games to start the season, which is really what we're all looking for, competitive play. What about these goalies? So what happens is our full-time goalies are observed and evaluated by an external company called 5Count. I'm going to send out a supplemental message because at U12 it looks a little different, but at U14 and up, we evaluate our goalies. Most of our goalies are 100% at those levels and up. If ever there's an athlete U14 or older that isn't 100%, they evaluate as a skater, and then we just want to make sure we balance the goalie interest on teams. But most of the time as we look to U14 and up, by then the goalies and the player cohort have kind of figured out, okay, who's playing goalie full-time, who's skating full-time. It's primarily full-time goalies, so they're assessed in their own evaluation session, and then also they're observed in the scrimmage skates that they participate in. If you'll notice, why aren't there as many goalies in U12 and U10? LTAD, long-term athlete development, it's certainly something we're passionate about, does not support full-time goalies at U12, U10, and that's why we look to partial goalies and as much rotation as possible, even though some of our other association partners don't always choose to follow that, but that's another matter. We choose to control what we can control. Our evaluators. So right now, I am in the process of reaching out to many of our amazing coaches. A lot of times we'll ask our U16 coaches to help us evaluate a level they've previously coached, perhaps U12. When you see these people in the stands, please give them some space. Please give them some grace. As someone that's done this myself before, you want to do as best a job as you possibly can. So they are focusing on the athletes they're observing. Every athlete when we're observing them, they're double evaluated. So they're on at least 2 of those evaluators' clipboards, and we ask them to observe and score the athletes for both their skills and things like their gameplay sense. And that's why we have multiple scrimmages. So we're getting multiple views by different evaluators to give our athletes the most accurate assessment as possible. So when you see those evaluators, please let them do their work and give them a bit of space, and just let them focus on the athletes on the ice. And then just some observations from last year. I would have noticed, and it happens, what we do is we have different skate groups, and the way the scoring system works is after every skate group, we tend to take roughly the top grouping that scored the highest. Maybe it's 4 to 5 athletes. If we notice a bit of a natural break, we move them to the next skate group. And then to balance things out, we look at the 4 or 5 players that maybe scored at a certain level that it would make sense to have them skate in the other skate groups. And I certainly noticed through feedback, a lot of athletes, parents, sometimes that kind of lands tricky if you notice you change skate groups. Please know that our scoring all adjusts for that. Because what typically happens if, say, an athlete scores at a certain level in a stronger skate group, they then maybe move skate groups and score at the other end of the scoring system. And we have an adjustment factor that essentially makes those roughly the same outcome. And it just helps us observe what kind of skill gap exists as we observe the different skates. But I know, I just want to acknowledge that we know moving skate groups and even just starting in a certain skate group, because we have to use our history to figure that out. We can use UAAs at U14 and under, U16, U19. We just have to look at the traditional placement of the athlete, and you just have to draw a line somewhere. We really don't want athletes fussing as much as possible over which skate group. Just go out and skate their hardest and trust the process. So why is it so last minute? Sometimes our division directors are emailing you at 11 at night about a skate time tomorrow. That's just because us as volunteers, we're often entering and double checking and triple checking all that data to set the skate groups the next day, confirm for our division directors, here's the group, here's the lineup, to balance things out. And it just is the process. So just apologies. We know sometimes you'll get late night emails on when you're skating the next day. That's just how the process works. And then what about coaches? We actually like to be very kind of not focused on coaches. We really focus on the athletes. The athletes evaluate where they evaluate, and then we observe who among the players that evaluate at a certain level has a prospective coach. And then our coaches have, I would argue, one of the hardest jobs. I've done it a couple times in the past. So if I can walk you through how this feels, I always remember I was in a different association. I was the U12B coach in my daughter's second year. And it's tough. How it works is you might have a 14-player roster, and then our process is such that we kind of tell you who your first 7 athletes are based on our evaluator score. Those athletes are automatically placed. And then of the next 7 skaters, as a coach, we then share with you who were the next 14 evaluated skaters, and it's your accountability as coach to decide who's going to make the mix of the team better. You might, especially as you get to the older levels, you might need a few more defenders. If you notice you've already got lots of forwards or centers, etc., it can be a very taxing role for our coaches. So what they're often doing late into the night as well, forming those teams so we get them on practice and just offer them a bit of grace as well. As someone that's done the job before, it's sometimes hard when you're staring at 5 great athletes and 5 great families and only 3 spots left. And you just do the best you can with the team that you're accountable to form, balancing things like positions and whatnot. So just the outcomes, as I often say, is it's the best process we have. We don't believe the perfect system exists. And I always just talk to my own athletes about the realities of the process. And if there is a year when maybe they were hoping to make B and they made C, when you're in that kind of bubble, sometimes it means, yes, you might end up on that B team and you're going to be challenged to get as many ring touches, et cetera, et cetera. That'll offer certain things. And then, yes, if you do end up on the C team, you get to potentially be a leader on that team who is accountable to push the players at practice because you are one of the athletes that was maybe a bit on the higher level of the skill set. My opinion, both are positive outcomes, even though I know many of you are listening saying that my athlete really wants that B team, not that C team, and just it's the realities of the process. So on that note, as we enter the next season, I just ask for, excuse me, empathy number one for our athletes. We know this can be a stressful time for you and in turn their parents who want nothing but joy for their children, for their athletes. So just empathy for them first and foremost, followed by our volunteers, whether it's our division directors, the evaluations committee, all those people helping on the ice. I just ask for some empathy. They're all doing their best, even though when you're a volunteer, sometimes your best isn't perfection. We are all trying. We mentioned those evaluators, and we certainly talked about our coaches as well. And just a big motto I always like to lean on is everyone gets a team. Just at the end of the day, we will all end up on a team. We will all then put our thoughts to having a great season. And that's really our goal over the coming weeks, is to get to that process as soon as humanly possible in the best possible way we can. So on that note, all the best to all of you who chose to listen. I hope this was informative. If you do have a follow-up question, by all means, reach out. I will do my best to be responsive at what is typically a busy time of year. And we'll see you around the rinks and in the weeks and months to follow. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen, and have yourself a great rest of the day. Bye for now.